Today I'm talking to Sam Harris, a neuroscientist and outspoken critic of religion. Along with fellow religion haters Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, Harris is fiercely smart and never wishy-washy. So when his new book arrived in our office, I did a double take. It's called Waking Up, A Guide to Spirituality Without Religion. What? Is one of the most militant leaders of the new atheism movement getting all soft on us? Well, not quite. Welcome to the show, Sam.
Thank you, Maureen. It's a pleasure to be here.
As you undoubtedly know from your talks around the country, the idea of spirituality outside a religious context sounds really strange to some people. So how do you understand and define spirituality? And how is that different from religion?
Right. Yeah, well, this is, as you're aware, an important question and a very important distinction for me. Spirituality really relates to the far positive end of the continuum of human experience. So the deepest states of well-being, personally or collectively, that we can experience. I think that the project of finding out what those are and how to access them can be called spirituality. So we're talking about experiences like self-transcendence, unconditional love, etc., bliss, rapture. And as you know, these experiences mostly have been understood and sought in the context of religion. The difference for me is when you have a quote spiritual experience like unconditional love, the spirituality that is compatible with scientific rationality is to take that experience as data confirming that such experiences are possible, and to understand that experience in the context of 21st century psychology and neuroscience, and all of the efforts we make to understand the human mind should be brought to bear on capturing that experience, understanding how people can have it, how to maximize it, what its value is, etc. The religious move, which I think is illegitimate and which I argue against it really in many of my books, but at some length in this one, is to extrapolate from that experience to making claims about the nature of the cosmos. So if you have an experience like unconditional love, that tells you something very clear about the human mind. It tells you something about the possibilities of human experience. And if you were to study the brain while someone was having that experience, you would know something about the brain. But what it does not entitle you to say is something about the cosmos at large. You can't say that the energy of love pervades the galaxy. You can't say that love was here before the Big Bang. You're not doing cosmology when you have experiences like that. And that's a distinction that most religious people don't observe, and many New Age philosophers don't observe. Someone like Deepak Chopra will tell you that you know something about the cosmos that you can learn in the darkness of your closed eyes when you're meditating, and that I think is just patently untrue.
So what you're saying is, out of these kinds of experiences of bliss or unconditional love, you can't, at least scientifically, ascertain anything beyond the human level, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Yeah, but one of the things that you can experience is what I call self-transcendence. You can realize that what you take yourself to be most of the time, this skin-encapsulated ego, is an illusion. You can lose your sense of being a subject riding around in your body as a kind of passenger, and that is a very freeing, a very desirable experience, and it does confirm much of the language of traditional mysticism and spirituality, but again, what it doesn't do is allow you to score a point in favor of one or another provincial doctrine. So if you're a Christian and you have this experience of self-transcendence, it doesn't tell you anything about the veracity of Christian doctrine. And it's very easy to see why that's so, because Christians have this experience, but Buddhists and Muslims and Hindus and Jews and atheists like myself have this experience. So we know that these experiences can't be data in favor of any sectarian doctrine, and yet most religious people interpret them that way, and that I think is a problem.
Now, your book is really a guide, in a sense, to spirituality without religion. But a lot of religious people would say it's too easy to be spiritual but not religious. They say there's nothing challenging about having deep thoughts all by oneself or experiencing unconditional love. What's interesting is doing work together in community, digging deeply into a tradition that you did not invent all for yourself. How do you respond to that?
Well, I would agree that much of what we want out of life is social and communal, and we need institutions. We don't make up civilization for ourselves, and we absolutely want to collaborate with others to build a common project. So the focus of my book is not on many of those collective games we might play together. It's much more on the nature of human consciousness and what any one individual can realize about it through disciplined approaches of introspection, and how those insights connect with what we know about the brain at this point. But the laziest move of all is to simply imagine that believing something about God, believing something about the divine origin of a holy book, calling God by the right name, that these things matter in some ultimate sense, that all you need to do is believe that Jesus is the Son of God and that he died for your sins and you will be saved. And there's no burden on you really in the end to be a good person, to be a wise person, to be able to concentrate, to be able to cut through the automaticity of being lost in thought every moment of your life. That's the laziest move of all, and that is a very conventional and well-subscribed approach to religious faith.
Now, let me say that's not the approach to religious faith that I've heard. Most of the religious people that I know, I happen to be Catholic myself, believe that if you subscribe to the basic doctrines and teachings of Jesus and Christianity, in fact, you've got to live them out. You can't just leave them up in the air someplace, and that it really does call you to live in community, to be in community with other people, and to try to do good in the world. And people that I know that have that tradition, it leads them into a lot of this spiritual practice that you talk about. Now, theirs would be different than yours because it comes out of a particular tradition, but they would see that as linked.
Well, yeah, I'm not disputing that. Clearly, many believers, their beliefs absorb much of their energy and attention throughout their lives. But there is this widely held belief among Christians and Muslims in particular that if you only believe the right things at a certain point, you will be saved. And if you don't believe the right things, no matter how good you are, you'll be damned. So if you're a serial killer who comes to Jesus on death row at the last minute, having led a truly terrible life, causing needless misery for countless people, you can experience an eternity of happiness after death. Whereas if you're Gandhi or somebody who by accident of birth had the wrong religion, you may very well wind up in hell for eternity. Now, that is not every Christian believes that, but certainly many, many millions do. And so that's what I'm calling a very lazy and ultimately vacuous approach to spirituality.
I think some of the believers I know would be closer to what you would say about people like Gandhi or that serial killer. But let's move on here. You are known as one of the so-called four horsemen of the new atheism movement, along with Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett. And simply stated, this movement says religion should simply not be tolerated. It should be directly criticized and undermined. For the record, does that still describe you today?
Yeah, well, you have to be clear about what we mean by not tolerated. I'm not arguing that we should pass laws against religious belief. I'm not for religious persecution. I'm for removing the barriers to honest conversation that we have erected to protect religious thinking in particular. So faith claims don't work in any area of our lives except when we're talking about God or what happens after death or the divine origin of your favorite book. If I tell you that I believe Elvis is still alive, you do not have to respect that belief. You can ask me why I think it, and insofar as I won't have a compelling answer, you can tell me it's completely uncompelling. And if I were interviewing for a job at your company, hire me because I believe in Elvis still alive more or less discredits me as a rational thinker on many other topics. And so it is with alien abductions and all the rest. But if I tell you that I think Jesus is born of a virgin and the sole savior of the world, and that he'll be returning to resurrect the dead at some point, that has to be respected. Now, I think when you translate faith claims into ordinary language and you recognize that all we're talking about in science and in religion and in the rest of culture, all we're talking about are claims about the nature of reality, claims about history and the way the world works and what happens after death and what is possible in this universe. And we can make these claims on the basis of either good or bad evidence. We can have good or bad reasons for what we believe. And all I'm arguing is that we should stop respecting bad reasons. And be very honest about what constitutes a good reason and a bad reason, because our beliefs about the nature of reality really matter.
Yes, I think most people wouldn't argue with that. I think they would say that people of faith would say that what they believe about their particular faith tradition comes from revelation. I don't think they would argue that it comes from a scientific understanding of reality. Isn't that?
But it makes scientific claims, whether you want to call them scientific or not. Just to stick with the resurrection of Jesus and his virgin birth, for instance, these are claims about biology. These are claims about the human survival of death. These are claims about, if you take the story really literally, the claim is a claim about human flight without the aid of technology. It's the claim about a first-century carpenter somehow persisting until this moment, until some future time when he's going to return to Earth. These are all scientific claims, and if Jesus does return to Earth and performs the requisite miracles, every scientist on Earth will be convinced of the truth of Christianity. It will become the science of Christianity at that point. So these are all claims about empirical reality. It's just they're claims made on very poor evidence. They're claims made in defiance of mountains of counter evidence.
Right. So what I'm hearing you say is that the kind of knowledge you respect, which I think most people of faith respect as well, is scientifically based knowledge, but knowledge that claims another source, whether it is revelation of any kind, spiritual revelation, is something that a person of faith might respect, but that's not something that you as a scientist and as someone who rejects religion would put your faith in.
Well, it depends what you mean by revelation, because I, as you know from in this book, Waking Up, I focus on all the kinds of claims we can make based on first-person experience. I think those can run very, very deep. They just don't happen to run in the direction of making claims about the history of the world or the future of humanity or the divine origin of specific books. But and the kind of revelation you're talking about, or certainly that most people of faith in the Christian or Muslim tradition or Jewish tradition subscribe to, are claims about the divine origin of specific books. And I think those claims are clearly illegitimate. First of all, we only have them, we only hold those to be true, or those that do hold them to be true, based on a claim made in the book itself. So why do Muslims think the Quran is the perfect word of the creator of the universe? Because the book itself says so. Well, that's completely insane, right? And you can see it with respect to Islam. As a Christian, you're not inclined to see it with respect to the Bible, but it's still based on the claim that the Bible makes for itself. Now, I could write a book tomorrow that claimed to be a revelation from an advanced civilization in Andromeda. It wouldn't make it such a revelation. You can write anything you want in a book, and this is clearly what people did anciently. And we have some number of people, a majority of human beings at this moment, dignifying these claims on the basis of no other evidence. But just think how good a book would be if it were written by an omniscient being. I mean, what would be in the Bible if it were really written by the creator of the universe? Would there be endless examples of sacrificing animals to a desert war god? I don't think so. Would there be something useful in the 21st century? Would we have the germ theory of disease and advanced mathematics and all the principles of science? And of course you would have those things. I mean, it would be trivially easy for an omniscient being to put in a single page about mathematics that the best mathematicians of the 21st century would still be finding useful. Of course, there's absolutely nothing like that in the Bible. In fact, there's not a single sentence that couldn't have been written by a first-century person. That is a huge problem for the claim that this is revelation from the creator of the universe.
But, of course, the Bible was written by first-century people, or before that, if you're talking about the Hebrew Scriptures. And, of course, the revelation is believed to be in the larger word as opposed to being the concrete scientific descriptions of what went on.
Well, it doesn't have those descriptions. If you are an omniscient being, omnibenevolent, omnipresent, and omniscient, and your purpose was to guide humanity with the wisest possible document, what would that document be? What would the Ten Commandments are really the only part of the Bible that were explicitly written by the creator of the universe, right? These weren't written by scribes. These were written by Yahweh and handed to Moses. And one problem is we have two incompatible versions of those commandments, but the commandments themselves are deeply inadequate. I mean, half of them don't even relate to ethics in any rational way. We've got, stuff about not taking the Lord's name in vain and not working on the Sabbath, and these are also killing offenses in that context, which is also suspect by our current morality. You have a book that supports slavery on balance. It never criticizes slavery. Whoever this creator was and his scribes under his inspiration couldn't figure out that slavery was morally problematic. Jesus couldn't figure out that slavery was morally problematic. We have superseded the wisdom of the Bible on that question clearly. If this were a perfect book, that should be impossible to do. And yet we've written thousands of better books on every specific topic that you might want to pull out of there.
And, of course, there are many people who read the Bible in different ways with different interpretations, as I'm sure you're well aware. Let me move on to the title of your book, Waking Up, A Guide to Spirituality Without Religion. I'm wondering how your fellow atheists react when they discover that you've embraced something called spirituality. Do they think you've gone to the other side?
Well, some of them probably do. It's inconvenient that atheism selects preferentially for people who haven't had these kinds of experiences and haven't been interested in them. There's a disproportionate number of people who have never wanted to learn how to meditate or never taken psychedelics or never touched what they would call an altered state of consciousness, and see no good reason to try. That, I think, is difficult to communicate with those people who more or less have closed the door to that area of inquiry. And so, I think among atheists, you have many people who are like that, but certainly not all. And so it's, to some degree, I'm alienating part of my audience and hopefully finding some other readers in the process.
And speaking of other readers, there's an increasing number of people, especially young people, who define themselves today as spiritual but not religious. And I'm wondering, A, if that's your audience, and B, if that's how you would define yourself.
Yeah, well, as you know from reading the beginning of the book, I'm still squeamish about this term spirituality, and so I can't, whenever I use it, I have found no better word. We simply don't have a good word in English to name this project. I use words like contemplative sometimes, and mystical is even worse. It's an even spookier word, and there's just there is no great word. But I would check that box if given that questionnaire, and 20% of Americans do. Many people who are spiritual obviously believe a lot of crazy things in the name of spirituality, so it's not selecting for pure scientific rationality either, but what I'm trying to do in this book is present a case for a really serious approach to spiritual experience that is completely compatible with our 21st century understanding about the nature of the world.
Part of your audience, intended audience, would be the spiritual but not religious group of people, probably.
Yeah.
Now, as I read your book, I was amazed when I came across this, that you yourself have spent at least 2 years in silent retreat. Now, in increments from 1 week to 3 months, but you practiced meditation at those times. Now, frankly, not many religious people could claim 2 years in silent retreat, but religious practitioners, as you know, might meditate on their scriptures or recall the lives and teachings of the Buddha or Muhammad or Jesus. What does an atheist seek on a silent retreat? What do you ponder?
Well, I did most of those retreats in a Buddhist context, and the practice I was doing was a very simple practice called Vipassana, and the technique in Vipassana that many people have now heard of is mindfulness. And mindfulness is now being studied scientifically and recommended in clinical contexts very, very widely at this point. So the reason why mindfulness is so popular now is that in a secular context is that it doesn't have any religious trappings. It's simply a technique for paying very close attention to the nature of experience. So in the beginning of a meditation, you would start with the breath, and you would just feel the sensations of breathing, just the sensations at the tip of the nostrils or at the rising and falling of your abdomen. And you would just follow each in-breath and out-breath. And every time your mind gets lost in thought, you'd bring it back to the sensation of breathing. And then gradually, as you build up some capacity to focus, you can then open your awareness to everything that you notice. So sounds and sensations in the body and moods and even ultimately even thoughts themselves as they arise and pass away. You notice them as objects of meditation. And it's a practice that's perfectly designed for export to a secular, rational context because there's nothing to assume in order to do it.
Right. It comes out of Buddhism. But for you, this is not a religious practice. It's a spiritual practice?
Right. Which is to say that there's nothing you have to believe on bad evidence in order to get this practice started. The only thing you have to assume is that if there's something worth noticing about your own consciousness in the present moment, you need to pay attention to notice it. So paying more attention makes sense. And so you're starting with that as a kind of scientific hypothesis that maybe there's something worth noticing here if I pay very close attention, then the whole path of inquiry just opens to you. And that is distinct from every other kind of meditation practice you can name or spiritual practice you can name, because everything else presupposes the validity of adding something else to your experience strategically, whether it's a mantra or you're praying to some deity that you imagine exists, or you're chanting, or whatever it is. And so this is just observing.
And do you consider Buddhism then a religion?
Well, it is a religion in the way that many millions of Buddhists think about it. You can certainly make the case, as many Buddhists have, that it's not a religion. That's really just a philosophy married to a very rigorous methodology of introspection and ethics. And I think that's the right understanding of what the Buddha taught puts it in that category. It's not actually religious. There are no faith-based claims that one should take seriously to be a Buddhist, but many Buddhists, of course, do, and they worship the Buddha as virtually a kind of God, and so that's religious.
What is the goal then of such meditation and its benefits in your view?
Well, it's really you could sort of enter this practice from one of two doors. You can either just be purely interested to see what your mind is like. Does the self actually exist? What kinds of experiences are possible? What is consciousness from a first-person side? Or you can become sensitive to the ways in which you are led to suffer in your life and want to reduce your capacity for suffering. So it doesn't need to be one or the other. It can be both. But suffering is certainly the emphasis that the Buddha gave, and coming to the end of suffering was the whole purpose of the path he taught. And when you look at how you suffer, it really is almost entirely a product of being lost in thought. You are thinking about what happened in the past, you're ruminating about it, regretting it, you're worrying about what's going to happen in the future, what may or may not happen in the future. You're endlessly rehearsing and reiterating to yourself, various entanglements you've had with other people, and all of this is taking place at the level of thought, and it's covering the present moment in every present moment, and leading to a real failure to connect with your life moment by moment, and that's something that you can cut through.
Now, of course, Buddhist meditation, mindfulness meditation, sounds really nice, and I think a lot of people feel that's kind of the low-hanging fruit of spirituality right now. And I want to play for you a clip from our 2014 interview with Jeff Wilson, who wrote a whole book on this.
Somehow, it's reached a point where in the United States we're able to contextualize Buddhism as being available for anyone to use in a way that we don't treat, say, Islam or Judaism or Christianity. You don't have, say, praying the rosary being presented as a medical technique that anyone can access that won't threaten your identity as a Jew and so on. Or you don't have Sufi whirling, for example, being conducted outside of some sort of religious or spiritual context and recommended for school children so that their grades will go up. But there's something about Buddhism and the way that we've contextualized it in the 20th and 21st centuries whereby we've imagined that it is available for these sort of appropriations.
So, Sam, how do you respond? Does he have a point that people like yourself are plucking mindfulness out of context as if it doesn't have a unique Buddhist spiritual content? Or do you think it's not unique?
Well, it is not unique. I mean, whatever is true about the nature of human consciousness and discoverable through introspection is not Buddhist, and it's not Christian, and it's not anything else. It's just we're just talking about the nature of human consciousness. So the question is how to study that from a first-person side. And there I think you need a rigorous technique of introspection. Now the difference, as I just said, the difference between mindfulness and something like Christian prayer is that with mindfulness, you don't have to assume the existence of anything metaphysical or unseen or supernatural in order to for the logic of the practice to begin working. Whereas if you're praying to Jesus, that immediately demands that you ask, well, is there a Jesus there to be prayed to? And that can become a basis for doubt. I would say very reasonable doubt in most people, but that's something that has to be taken on faith to get the project off the ground. And so it is with Islam, and so it is with even a more analogous practice would be something like transcendental meditation, TM, which is also very well subscribed. But the difference there is you're chanting a Sanskrit mantra, and it's very easy to begin to wonder, well, what's magical about this? Oh, couldn't I be chanting something in English that has no connection to Hinduism? And there's nothing wrong with mantra-based meditation, and there's nothing wrong with saying the rosary. I don't have any doubt that for thousands of years, Christian contemplatives have had very deep and fulfilling experiences on the basis of doing the Jesus prayer or chanting the rosary. I've read much of that literature, the Desert Fathers and Augustine and Aquinas and Saint Teresa and John of the Cross. I mean, all of that literature testifies to the capacity of the human mind, given the experiment of Christian contemplation, can have extraordinary experiences in consciousness. You just don't have to interpret those as proof that Christianity is true.
And you said something a little bit earlier that I think a theologian might pick up on, because there are many, certainly Christians, probably Muslims, Jews, etc., who would also say, in their view, there are different ways of acquiring knowledge. They would certainly recognize the scientific, which you do, but they would also put revelation in a kind of different category, which is not something you accept, obviously.
Well, and the truth is, I don't even think they accept it when there's an alternative on offer. So if you can make those claims about revelation all you want, but once you get some really good evidence that your faith is true, that will be the thing you focus on. So you have the ordinary Christian person who believes in revelation, but then their child gets cancer, and they hold a prayer circle, and the doctors say there's nothing they can do. This is incurable. Sorry. But the prayer circle gets working, and the child is cured. For the rest of that person's life, the first reason he or she will give for her faith is that my child had cancer, and we prayed over her, and she got better, even when the doctor said there was nothing to do. That will be the most compelling piece of evidence, and that's a scientific experiment. It's not a good scientific experiment. There's obvious problems with that, but it's really in the spirit of science that everyone seizes upon confirmation of their beliefs. And I think that's just a universal human fact of our cognition.
Yeah, and of course, some people would interpret it that way and some wouldn't, as we both know. But here's something else that Jeff Wilson told us about American mindfulness that I'd like you to respond to.
The authority over Buddhism, which used to rest with Asian, ordained, highly trained monks, that authority has been progressively sort of stripped away from them and given instead to people with secular professional credentials, so that the person teaching you mindfulness these days probably wears a business suit and a tie rather than has a shaven head and is wearing robes.
So why do you, as a white secular man who actively disdains religion, why do you now get to preach Buddhist mindfulness rather than having a Buddhist monk preach it?
Well, again, this is a practice that you can be more or less expert in. And I don't actually put myself forward as an expert, but as you pointed out, I've spent something like 2 years on silent retreat and have been practicing this technique of meditation for over 20 years. That is a wealth of experience that I can draw on, and I have many people in my life who have done much more practice than that, who are true experts in this practice, who've spent a decade or more on silent retreat, doing nothing but do this practice, 18 hours a day. So that's how you get good at it, and it's a. But I think what your other guest is focused on is I agree with part of what he's after there, which is mindfulness is a profoundly deep practice which is in some quarters being trivialized as just a almost like an executive stress ball. I mean, something that you can just add to your toolkit to be, a kind of optimize your life as a fully functioning ego. Whereas it's much more profound than that. It is a tool to recognize that the ego is an illusion. It's cutting through the ego is the goal, if you can call it such, of mindfulness practice. And many people are not adopting it with that goal in mind. And so many people are using mindfulness in a non-spiritual way. They're using it simply to feel a little bit better, to be able to concentrate better at work. And that's fine. It actually will help with those things, but that's not its true purpose. And if that's what your guest was focused on, I certainly agree with that part.
Now, a few weeks ago, we had Deepak Chopra on the show. And as you know, he has a lot of problem with new atheists. And he called out you specifically. I want you to listen to a clip from that interview, and I'd like you to respond to it.
Sure.
I've had several interactions with them personally, whether it's Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris. And what I find is that they're very cocky. They are very arrogant. They are dismissive of anybody who talks about the mystery of existence. And also, they use science as a camouflage to hide their own insecurities. The fact is that there is no scientific explanation for either existence or the awareness of existence.
So let's stop it there. Is that true? Is there a part of you that doesn't care for people who want to ponder the mystery of existence?
On the contrary, that this is a way of not pondering the mystery of existence. I mean, what's so wonderful about Deepak is that almost every word out of his mouth is proof of the opposite of the point he thinks he's making. And I would invite everyone who just listened to that quote to watch the debate I had with Deepak along with Michael Shermer and Gene Houston at Caltech. That's on YouTube, and do your best to find the arrogant one on the panel, and I'll give you a hint. It's the one wearing rhinestone glasses. But of course, existence is currently a mystery. The existence of the universe, the fact that there is anything as opposed to nothing, is a fundamental mystery at this point. And I think there's good reason to worry that we'll never get to the bottom of that mystery. It's hard to see what would accomplish that. We can get very, very close, but as to why there are laws of physics in the first place, that may just be a brute fact that we have to absorb. And so too with the existence of consciousness. I think in my book, I argue that consciousness very likely will remain a mystery. And I think I'm probably in a minority among neuroscientists and philosophers thinking that. But that is on paper, at least, I'm agreeing with Deepak there. But he's using that as a end to inquiry and as a way of marrying very spooky New Age claims to genuine scientific uncertainty, and that's an illegitimate move. What we need is intellectual honesty across the board. When you don't know something, just say you don't know something. There's no embarrassment in that. And when you have good reason to believe something's false, say that. But in a very woolly way, he's combining mysteries and combining uncertainties and making this pablum, which many millions of people, as you know, are very eager to consume. You were there before the Big Bang is essentially the punchline. There's no evidence for that.
And so, as a neuroscientist, what do you make of his idea that there's no scientific explanation for why we're here, that existence is a divine mystery? How do you respond to that?
There's no reason to say divine. It's a mystery. Now, there's a very clear scientific understanding of how we as a species are here based on all of our progenitors in the natural world. So evolution is reasonably well understood here. So what the mystery is how the whole process got started in the first place. That's uncertain. But I think that's tractable. I think we will one day almost certainly reproduce life in the lab in a way that emulates its beginning on Earth. But then push back the mystery further. How is it that we have a universe in the first place? That may be a fundamental mystery of cosmology which we cannot crack. And so too with why are certain states of information processing, in our case in the brain, associated with consciousness? Why do the lights go on anywhere ever? That may be fundamentally mysterious, and as I argue in the book, it will remain mysterious even if we knew the answer. It's almost like we're not cognitively equipped to make sense of the answer. If I told you, well, consciousness in the brain simply is state X, Y, Z of a certain collection of neurons, and that's just a fact, that doesn't explain the emergence of consciousness. Consciousness is still fundamentally mysterious, even if we knew its neural underpinnings.
Okay.
And that's unlike any other feature of the mind.
And finally, I'd like to hear your thoughts on interfaith dialogue, which, frankly, you don't seem to like very much. I want to quote from your 2006 book, Letter to a Christian Nation, and I've shortened this just a little bit, but here's what you said. It seems profoundly unlikely that we will heal the divisions in our world through interfaith dialogue. Devout Muslims are as convinced as you are that their religion is perfect and that any deviation leads directly to hell. It is easy, of course, for the representatives of the major religions to occasionally meet and agree that there should be peace on earth or that compassion is the common thread that unites all the world's faiths. But how can interfaith dialogue, even at the highest level, reconcile worldviews that are fundamentally incompatible and in principle immune to revision? Now, those are your words. And I just want to interject my own view here because, of course, as the creator of Interfaith Voices, I feel rather strongly about this issue. I don't think interfaith dialogue is about trying to revise somebody else's theology. I think it's about deepening understanding and wiping out prejudices toward other faith traditions. It seems obvious to me that it's better for practitioners of different faith traditions to talk and to share than to shun each other and perpetuate stereotypes. And I see it as a way for people of faith to understand, not necessarily embrace, but understand the theology and spirituality of the other, much as you learned from Buddhist mindfulness practice. And for the record, lots of Christians find that helpful as well. And I think such dialogue can correct misinformation, undercut prejudice, find avenues of working together. Isn't that worth it?
Well, conversation is better than violence, clearly. Our only hope is conversation. So I'm not against conversation. The point I was making there is that insofar as someone really believes any one of these doctrines, the dialogue can only go so far, and you really can't get past denigrating the other person, if only in the silence of your unexpressed thoughts. Because it's just a fact that Muslims believe that if you think Jesus was the Son of God, you're going to hell. I mean, it says that in the Quran, right? That's non-negotiable. So true Christians who believe that Jesus is God are, from a Muslim point of view, polytheists, and that is just anathema. That's a deal breaker. I mean, these doctrines are mutually incompatible. That's the problem. There is no happy meeting of Islam and Christianity. Hinduism can't be integrated by either.
But that's only if you're talking doctrine. If you're sitting there simply trying to understand where the other person is coming from, how they read their scriptures, how they understand their prophets, and then it dawns on you, oh, that's the reason you believe that. Now, I don't believe that, but can't we get along somehow in this world out of better understanding? I mean, surely that's something you could embrace, isn't it?
Sure. But all you're suggesting, though, is that people really don't believe these things as much as they say they do, or they don't believe them fully, or these beliefs aren't totally ruling their lives. Now, that's a good thing, because I think these are bad beliefs, but insofar as people really believe that hell is a reality, that your children, if they believe the wrong things, may go to hell after they die, that is, insofar as someone really believes that, that's the biggest problem that exists. That's much bigger than any problem that could befall them in their lives. I have 2 daughters. What am I concerned about for them? Well, I'm concerned that something terrible is going to happen to them over the next 70 years, right? But if you really believe in hell, that is eternal suffering. That is the thing to worry about. And it makes perfect sense, if you believe that, to want to protect your children from blasphemy and heresy, and to burn heretics alive for, as we did for centuries in Europe, based on a very widespread notion that nothing was more dangerous. Aquinas recommended that we kill heretics, and Augustine recommended that we torture them. As you know, Aquinas and Augustine are not peripheral figures in the Christian tradition. There are reasons to think that insofar as you actually believe the doctrine, and that's why I think these doctrines are dangerous.
And of course, ISIS does the same thing today. But
exactly.
I think people that engage in interfaith dialogue are nowhere near what you're describing.
Yeah, but you're misunderstanding me. I'm not telling you that all the people you have on your radio show are kind of closet inquisitors and want to see people of other denominations killed. These are people who have had their faith moderated by scientific progress and human rights and secularism. I mean,
also a very, shall I say, maybe humanistic interpretation of their scriptures.
Sure.
Who would look at the teachings of Jesus and they're not going to look as much at the virgin birth as at do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Of course, Maureen, but that has all been forced from the outside. I mean, the doors leading out of scriptural literalism and medieval theocracy don't open from the inside. They have been opened from the outside by all of the progress we've made on every front, in philosophy, in politics, in wider human conversation about how we can all flourish together in a pluralistic world.
Right, but what I'm suggesting is that wherever that state of affairs is today, at least in my experience, that's what informs the people who want to engage in interfaith dialogue and make a better world because of it.
No doubt. But it's not an accident that members of ISIS are not champing at the bit to be invited to the next interfaith dialogue. I mean, this is the people who are absolutely sure of paradise and absolutely sure that there's one way to get there are not, part of your audience, and those are the people I'm really worried about.
Yes, and I think everybody is. I don't think Torquemada would probably be in that category either. Sam Harris is the author of a new book called Waking Up, A Guide to Spirituality Without Religion. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sam.
Thank you, Maureen.
How hard would it be to improve the Bible?
It would be trivially easy. You and I could do it in 5 minutes, and we could do it in hugely consequential ways. So just puts a clear prohibition against slavery in there, which does not exist. In fact, the opposite exists. God tells us how to keep slaves. And the slaveholders of the South for over 100 years used that as a theological mandate to resist abolition. So put a clear commandment. It's unethical to own people and treat them like farm equipment. that would improve the Bible. If you took the misogyny out of there and the homophobia out of the New and Old Testaments, if you didn't give people an endless list of reasons to kill their neighbor for imaginary crimes like witchcraft and blasphemy and working on the Sabbath, etc., that would improve the book. A clear statement of 21st century ethics would improve the book.
Okay.
And, of course, anything scientific would improve the book.
Whose understanding?
When you talk about a 21st century understanding of the world, a 21st century understanding of ethics, who are you talking about?
Well, I'm talking about all of us. I'm talking about just the Christians who find wisdom in the Bible. When you go to the Bible and you read it from cover to cover, you have to pick and choose its wisdom, because obviously it's not all wise. You don't take the prohibition against eating shellfish under penalty of death from Leviticus or Deuteronomy seriously. You reject that. That's not the inspiring part of the Bible. But when you get to the Beatitudes, when you get to the Sermon on the Mount, you say, there's Jesus giving me all the ethical wisdom I was hoping to find in the Bible. Well, just from that single example, you can see that you are the guarantor of the wisdom you're purporting to find in the Bible. You are the one who's doing the choosing. You're the one who says, this is beautiful, this is wise, this is useful. And you're doing that on the basis of a larger conversation you've had. And much of the wisdom we find in any ethical system is the result of allowing us to find more successful ways of relating to one another in social space and collaborating with strangers and finding bases for trust. And it's not an accident that our well-being depends on our successfully doing that. But we know so much more about that, about how to create a common project and successful societies than anyone who wrote the Bible did. And that is obvious from reading the Bible.
You said that for you, spirituality is about taking things at the far positive end of human experience, like bliss. Mm-hmm. What about the far negative end? People who are in depression or suffering from some incredible physical deformity, etc.
Yeah, well, in that case, spirituality is about mitigating that suffering insofar as we can. And not all of it is best addressed through a technique like meditation, but certainly much of it is, because, again, as I said, the mechanism by which our suffering is meted out to us is to be thinking every moment of our lives. We are having a conversation with ourselves. We are ruminating about experience rather than merely being aware of experience in each moment. And so all of our anxiety and fear and self-judgment, and it's all mediated by thought. And if you can cut through, if you can break that spell of thought, you can find that in each moment, whatever your problem is, in each moment, you can be with it. Even if you think it's unendurable, you've already put up with it for yet another moment. If you just become interested in the nature of consciousness in each moment, you can find a really exquisite relief even in the midst of physical pain. Much of the suffering that results from physical pain is the result of our resistance to just feeling it, our thinking about it, our thinking about how to get out of it, how to change, or about what it means. Do I have cancer? Just the worry that you might have cancer based on a physical pain could make a pain that would otherwise be totally trivial a source of absolute terror and misery, because you're just thinking about it. Meditation is an antidote to that process.
There's a whole industry of biblical interpretation out there. Not everybody takes this book literally.
Well, because
people I know don't.
It's very difficult to do that because it's so self-contradictory and so at odds with what we know about the universe now that if you're going to believe the Genesis story literally, then you have to disbelieve all of modern biology. You can't believe in evolution. And that's a problem. That's an intellectual problem that is insuperable for many people, and so they find some way of reinterpreting Genesis to make it still wise and useful and even indispensable, but no longer an authority, a literal authority on how the animals got here.
Sam Harris's newest book is called Waking Up, A Guide to Spirituality Without Religion. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sam.
Thank you, Maureen.